Major natural disasters are irreversible, and there are several cases caused by man that demonstrate the impact that we can have on the environment, many of them having eradicated life at such points.
The first example is the Marsh Arabs, people who lived in southern Iraq, near the Tigre and Euphrates confluence region, which is one of the cradles of humanity. This region is so rich in vegetation that in the Bible it is described as the Garden of Eden. A characteristic of this region was the rivers that flowed, distributing the river's riches in the soil, which allowed forests and societies to develop. This area was famous for the reed forests, which they used for all kinds of raw materials like boats, temples, and houses that were suspended on floating reed islands.
After the revolution that put Saddam Hussein in power in Iraq, since Saddam was Sunni and the majority of the Iraqi population was Shiite, he started a great war with Iran. Many of Saddam's political enemies went into hiding in the region where the Marsh Arabs lived. To end that, Saddam decided to destroy it. They built several dams that made this whole region a great desert. UNESCO considered it the worst natural disaster caused by man in the 20th century. Only 10% of these swamps still exist, where the natives took refuge. After the assassination of Saddam Hussein, the people broke down some dams on their own. Even without tools for that, the rivers have returned, but not a revelment.
The second example is the Vietnam War, with its rainbow herbicides. The USA wanted to avoid communism in Southeast Asia. The United States lost the war for many reasons, but one of them was the fact that they fought in a very humid place full of forests, completely unprepared for the Viet Cong guerrilla techniques, who were like ghosts thanks to the forests. The Americans knew that those forests were a large part of the Vietnamese livelihood, so they had So they had an idea very similar to that of the Iraqis. They decided to destroy the forests. One of the strategies to destroy the forest was the rainbow herbicides. From 1961 to 1971, Americans threw 73 million liters of chemical agents across southern Vietnam. These agents deserted that entire region. Nowadays the vegetation is recovering, but all of these chemical agents are highly resistant in the environment. They have accumulated in the soil, in rivers, and in animals, so ecosystems have been permanently destroyed and many species of animals have become extinct. These not only affected nature but also people, who suffered hereditary deformities such as mental retardation, cerebral palsy, and poor development of the limbs. After 50 years and 4 generations, such problems still exist.
In the previous example, the human being deliberately destroy nature. But the third example, the Aral Sea, is this opposite. The Aral Sea was in the middle of the eastern region of the Soviet Union, currently on the border of Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and it is fed by two rivers called Sir Daria and Amu Daria. This region was surrounded by a desert, but it was a very rich region. It is actually a saltwater lake and not a sea. Stalin wanted to transform that desert area into an agrarian called the Great Plan for the Transformation of Nature. Stalin wanted to transform that desert area into ignoring the climate of the region that does not allow it. The Soviets diverted the course of the two rivers for irrigation to the side, even going were very, very, very far from the lake. Stalin obeyed Trofim Lysenko, geneticist who denied science and who said genetics was a capitalist invention and should not be applied. All of this hunger containment measure fails.
With Stalin's death, Lysenko was put aside, but Stalin's predecessor, Nikita Khrushchev, continued this plan, changing the name to Virgin Lands Campaign. This lasted until the 1990s, even after the collapse of the Soviet Union. While those waters were being used more and more, these reached the point where the water that was used became greater than the amount of water that arrived in the lake. And the lake started to dry out and to get more and more salty. That region deserted and the climate changed. It deserted to get much hotter in summer and much colder in winter, because the lake regulated the temperature with the rains, and the region that was once rich stopped bearing fruit. In response, the Russians increased the use of pesticides. It fell into the rivers and went to the rest of the lake, making it toxic. So toxic that the people can no longer live there. The countries where the lake is decided to use 1% of their GDP for the recovery of the lake, ending irrigation and passing some of the Caspian Sea water over there. But these countries are very poor, and the whole economy that lake generated was devastated.
We make a big impact and it gets the point of climate change. If we stop the emission of greenhouse gas completely, the average temperature would only start to decrease in 2100, and we're struggling to reduce it. It has the fallacy that there are already been several climatic change. But if we compare it with the Ice Age, for example, it happened in thousands of years, we are doing it in 150 years. All crises are cyclical and reversible, but these crises will last a long time, and those who will suffer the most are the next generation, your children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. We have to take action against this urgently.